It's great. I mean, what we're seeing is more and more people coming to us with OpenTelemetry wanting to do just what you said, right? It's a couple of years ago, it wasn't that. A couple of years ago, people didn't know about OpenTelemetry. People would come to us with all kinds of data and they would want to get it in. And what we've seen, with all of our customers is once you get your data into Honeycomb, you start using it and you learn how it can transform how you think about reliability, how you can reduce, TCO for your services, how you can respond to incidents quicker, how you can really monitor what matters, set SLOs, all that. We would used to be a really big challenge to integrate, right?
Yeah.
Now we have people coming to us and say, I'm using OpenTelemetry, in 80%, 90%, 100% of my services, and I'm using some other thing right now. I see what you all say. Let's try it out.
Give it a go.
And the proof is in the pudding, as it were, right? Like once you get the data in, it's very easy to get the data in, and then you can see the value of it. And I would actually, one thing that I think is always kind of a hidden question here is, well, if the data is the same, how do you differentiate?
Good question. Yeah.
So
I was going to ask you that next. So thanks for seeing.
I'm just clever like that, I guess. So we announced last week Honeycomb for Kubernetes, which is a new way to think about Kubernetes as an application developer. So in many cases, in a lot of larger organizations especially, we like to think about shifting left, DevOps, Agile, all SRE, all this as bringing these things together, but you still run into the same problem of I have application devs that are sitting here logging into Jira, pulling tickets, doing things, shipping code, deploying it, and then once Argo picks it up and it goes off to Kubernetes, it's kind of like mystery box time, right?
Yeah.
I know it deploys to Kubernetes. I don't really know what Kubernetes does. And okay, I guess it's good now, right? There's so much happening in Kubernetes. It's such it can be a very complicated system. On the flip side, you have your operations people, in a lot of cases, that are managing Kubernetes clusters, that are monitoring, infrastructure health, and they're using a lot of metrics. They're using Grafana. They're using a lot of, log collection and centralization. Maybe your app devs have traces and app metrics and things like that, but they're looking at it in a different place, and they're
very different domains.
Different domain, yeah. So what we've solved is OpenTelemetry gives you a lot of great data about Kubernetes out of the box, right? With the integrations of the collector, you can get metrics, you can get events, you can get everything you really need to understand the health of a Kubernetes cluster and the health of workloads on that cluster. So what we have done is we have used, sort of the expertise that we have. One of the most common things when I talk to people that are getting started with Kubernetes is they'll look at it and be like, what does all this mean? Right? What's a what's a taint? What's what are all these different events that can happen? And which ones are important to me to know? And I think this actually goes back to, this is one of the great things about OpenTelemetry as a project, is that people can look at what we're doing and learn from it, right? So realistically, maybe, does Kubernetes need to emit fewer metrics or fewer events? Probably not. But should there be something where it's like, hey, we can kind of give you this curated experience out of Kubernetes itself? So we want to learn how we can take the lessons that we're learning and building for our customers and bringing those back into cloud native and saying like, hey, here's what we're seeing. Let's figure out how to make this better for everybody, not just, Honeycomb customers.
We touched on both kind of like showing the value of your product, and then we touched on kind of these deep domains of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so I guess next I want to shift to both OpenTelemetry and Honeycomb start to solve a problem of today's application developers own a huge chunk of complexity that's too much for one human. And so both projects the product and the project tend to, both in my mind, seem to aim to help solve that problem of like, how much does a developer need to know to go and operate their software without kind of overloading and burning their brain to a crisp?
I think that's actually going to be the big challenge going forward for people in this market, right? Thinking of it more as a product. Because the goal of OpenTelemetry, again, is to move all this, is to shift it left, right? You don't necessarily want to be in the business having to maintain a bunch of integrations for JDBC or for every single logging framework or every single, React.
And it never
or
ends.
whatever.
There's a new one every day.
You're right. What we want to provide is we want to say, hey, if you're a developer of an open source product or project, if you're writing a library, if you're writing the next great JavaScript framework, and your customers, your users will want telemetry about what's going on. They will want metrics, traces, and logs. Integrate OpenTelemetry, and now it'll work with anything your customers use, your users use, right? And as we get there, the problem is going to change slightly from that curation question is going to become much, much more relevant to not only application engineers who are trying to, who do need that like strong curation of like, this is the stuff that I can control, but also for operators, right? Also for security, also for, business analysts and everyone in the organization, because the amount of data is going to increase exponentially the more things that adopt OpenTelemetry, because it is designed to give you just an ocean, a fire hose of highly detailed, context-rich data. And so I think that how people are going to even evaluate this space is going to change because of that, right? Like it's going to turn into, how do you help me make sense of all this? How do you help me find the valuable parts of this stream? Help me find the things that are really impacting, the experience of my end users, the things that are generating value for me as a team or us as a business, and expose those to people that could actually solve the problems.
And I think that's the opportunity for AI, both in products and kind of just in general, right? Is there's so much data, there's so much context that we have at some point recently at least somewhere in the last decade, past the point where most of our stacks are pretty hard for one person to understand. So we can bring AI tools in to help make that more accessible, both in the creation of code and the understanding of code. And I understand Honeycomb has a feature that makes that a little bit easier for some of your users.
Right. So we have some, we call it Query Assistant. And what we do with that is we use AI, large language models to translate, a natural language query into a Honeycomb query. So you can go in and you're getting paged, or you have alerts, and you don't immediately see what the problem is. So it's like, why are there so many 500 errors, right? Or what's the slowest pod? Or what are my worst database queries, right? And you can just use your words, and we will translate that into a Honeycomb query and then display that information. And then you really drop into the Honeycomb experience, right? Where you see like, okay, here's my slowest database queries. Let me just look at this top 5%, draw a little box around it, and bubble up. And now we show you what is the same and what is different. And then you find things to keep continuing asking questions on. We know what Kubernetes clusters look like based on this OpenTelemetry data. So we can see that you're sending us stuff from Kubernetes, and we can just be like, hey, there's some stuff you're probably interested in, right? And we make it easy for you to get started by giving you these configs and giving you Helm charts and documentation and all of that. And it's really about how do we make a nice, smooth ramp to get you into this experience. But it's built on what we already have and the stuff that we get from OpenTelemetry in terms of semantic conventions and so on and so forth. And I think that is a model that you'll see kind of get repeated. So things like observability for AI and large language models and training models and stuff like that. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to be OpenTelemetry data. It's going to be OpenTelemetry semantic conventions. There's a PR open right now to add in metadata, like semantic convention metadata for large language models. Because if you're a developer and your boss comes to you and says, all right, we got to have a Gen AI story, so we're going to build a chatbot, and you're just blindly sending things into, Claude or GPT or whatever, and getting responses back, then you don't know what's going on back there. You need observability to help you understand how is the responses from the model actually, like, are people happy with this?
And more importantly, how is it impacting your customers?
Yeah, like, are people actually happy with the responses? Like, what do the prompts look like, right? Like, are we actually achieving some kind of goal here? And you can do that with OpenTelemetry. I mean, you can do a lot of it today, right? We're just trying to make it standardize. We're trying to make it so that you don't have to build this stuff yourself. You just kind of get it for free.
But you said semantic conventions, so a lot of folks don't really understand what those are. So you can just briefly talk a little bit about what the semantic conventions do.
So the idea with semantic conventions is that any piece of telemetry, right, in Open Telemetry, you've got your a log statement, a single, counter going up, a span of time in a trace. There's things that you want to know, metadata you want to attach to that. You want to say, like, what was the IP address of the host that this happened on? What was the user agent of the browser that made an incoming request? What was the, CPU architecture of this Lambda? Was it x86? Was it ARM? And what OpenTelemetry is doing is we're creating a specification that says how those should be represented in any language, in any cloud, any runtime. And that means when you use OpenTelemetry data, you're getting the same attribute. You're going to have this consistent and standard metadata regardless of where you're running it, regardless of what architecture you're running it on, regardless of what cloud. And that saves you a lot of time, both in understanding the telemetry, because the stuff you get out of AWS or Azure or GCP or Equinix or whatever is going to look exactly the same in terms of what's on there. And it also means that you can do things like your alerts, right? Your alerts are going to be on the same kind of conditions, and they're going to be looking for the same sort of things because the semantics of all your telemetry is the same from observability tool to observability tool to observability tool.
And it solves some simple things like a developer in Python wants everything to be state case with underscores between the words, and then Java developers want to do camel case where it's capital letter, rest of the word capital letter.
Yeah.
But semantic conventions kind of flatten it all and be like, we're all going to use this standard so that when I go search for the host name, I know what I'm looking for, and I'm going to get the same thing from all the different stacks.
And the other nice thing is because in your language SDK, we try to be really idiomatic and say well, this should look like something a Java dev would expect. But then when it comes out the other side, it is coerced into the standard format. So you as the dev get to do things you're comfortable with. You're not having to learn completely new lexicons. And then from a visualization and sort of an operationalizing it side, it's the same between all these different tools. It gives you a shared language, right? I think this is one, to be philosophical for a moment, one of the biggest problems in observability is actually a linguistic one. It's getting everyone to agree what the meaning of words are, right?
I've been in those arguments.